Hello, everybody. This is our last presentation for AGF 210. I'm sure you're as glad as I am to have this almost done. You do still have whatever outstanding assignments you have to get in and also the final exam, but we're going to get through it, and I'm really proud of all of you who've stuck with me and for whatever other classes you have. And hopefully you'll have a little bit of time to relax before starting the next semester. Okay, I'm going to go over the final exam review now. So the final exam has 200 points total. There's a total of 32 questions. The questions can come from any lecture, lab, field trip, or any of the other activities, including some of the references referenced on Moodle. The test is a mixture of short answer, multiple choice, matching, calculation questions, and one food map creation exercise. Now, the exam is on Moodle. It's set up as a quiz. The link is in the first Moodle section, which I'll show you a screenshot in a second. You will have one chance at the exam. You'll have a total of 3 hours to work on it once you've opened up and started the exam. In the past, most students in my classes have finished it in less than an hour, and that's with a closed book. And this time, because of circumstances, I've said you can use assignments, lab reports, field trip reports, etc., anything that will help. But since you only have 3 hours to do it, and who knows what kinds of interruptions you'll get, please do spend at least a little time studying, go over this presentation again, and have an idea where to find the information so that you won't end up having to spend a lot of time searching and not have it at hand so that you can find the answer. I am hoping that some of the stuff that we've done in class has stuck in your brain so that you won't have to go searching for the answers. So the exam will be available from 4 p.m. today, Monday, until 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, April 23rd. And remember, you have until the end of the day, Thursday, to get in any assignments that you haven't done up till now. Also note, the school changed a few of the abilities that I have to change things on Moodle during this pandemic, mostly because some of the other classes throughout the university that have always been on virtual needed the power of Moodle to be able to continue. So don't be upset or concerned if you look at those totals on the grades in Moodle and find that it's not correct. I do know that the numbers in there are correct, but it's not adding things up. So let's continue with the review. So down on the first page, when you go into Moodle, right at the first introductory section, there's going to be a link to the final exam. Right below that, I added a copy of these slides so that you can go back and reference them. Now remember, once you open the link, you'll be asked if you want to start the exam. Once you start it, you have 3 hours, and you're not going to be able to stop and start or restart it. So keep that in mind. Next slide. So one of the first classes that we had was talking about farming and how farmers and farming practices can be sustainable. That was from January 16th. Please go back and review those slides. We talked about farming and sustainability, and how do the farmers that we had in class, how do they do sustainability? What does that look like to them on the ground? Remember that they use things like cover crops. They had diverse farms growing both animals and plants. They concentrated on enriching the soil, because the healthier the soil is, the healthier the plants are going to be, the healthier the soil is, the more rainfall it can absorb, and the whole system is going to work much better. They were all smaller scale. The smaller the scale you are doesn't mean that it's not going to be economical or that you can't compete. You can actually have a more profitable farm on a smaller scale than some of the larger farms. And all of the farmers worked directly selling their products to consumers. And remember that a sustainable food system has to start with the farmers. If we don't talk about the farmers and the practices they use, we're never going to reach the point of getting to a sustainable food system. Next, we talked about food safety standards and how are we going to, we talked a little bit about how are we going to ensure that we produce safe and healthy foods. Think back to that, the food contamination issues. So how does the Food Innovation Center and the Valley Hub ensure that the farms that they purchase from are producing safe food? They do have to have a comprehensive food safety plan. If you don't have a plan, you're not going to be able to take care of what happens when a disaster happens. That probably can be seen with the current pandemic, but we're not going to get into politics here. Growers must agree to be inspected by the Food Innovation Center. If farmers are unwilling to share how they work, they could very well be using unsafe practices. Now, this is a point that I want to make apart from the work that you do, whether you're in restaurants or whatever, but also as an individual consumer. If you're at the farmer's market talking to farmers about how they work, ask if you can visit their farm. If they say absolutely not, we don't let anyone on our property, I would be a little bit concerned. There are some people who don't allow visitors due to biohazards, and that might be the case, but as long as they're willing to talk to you about how they do things, that's great. How else can restaurants, food hubs, etc., ensure that they're using safe local foods? Because the question is local food automatically safer than food that's grown a far distance from here? Not necessarily. Getting to know the farmers that you work with. Can't see the bottom of my slide, darn. Getting to know the farmers that you purchase from, learn what the farmers can do to increase farm sustainability, and also learn about some of the certifications available to farmers and what kind of questions that you need to ask farmers. So those are all ways that you can increase the safety of the food that you're serving in your restaurant, or the food hub can do it in their dealings. Safety and ensuring nutritious food. Oh, I forgot to change that date. Anyway, we talked about that cantaloupe listeria contamination in Jensen Farm. Now, some of the possible causes for that contamination, and here's where I'd like you to think about the triple bottom line perspective. If a business is only in business to push things through, to get them out the door, they may start to take a few shortcuts when it comes to safety and cleanliness. And some of the things that they did at Jensen Farms were not sanitizing the equipment between products. If you'll recall, they processed potatoes, which are grown in the ground, on the washing equipment right before they went to cantaloupe, and the whole system was not cleaned in between. And listeria is one of those bacteria that can, it's really hardy, and it can survive all kinds of conditions. It can even survive a certain amount of refrigeration. So rushing production to get products to consumers is another thing that they may have done. It may have been this as far as why they just skipped over that cleaning step. Lack of training of employees. That is always an issue. If employees aren't properly trained to know, first of all, that it has to be standard procedure to wash that equipment after each process, but also they have to be trained well enough and also feel comfortable enough with their employer to question things if the rules aren't being followed. So that gets back to the question, is local food automatically safer? All of these things, the lack of training, the rushing production, not sanitizing in between products, are an indication that just because it's local doesn't mean it's safe. You also have to follow the rules whether it's local or coming from a long distance away. So how can restaurants and farms work to ensure safer local foods? Auditing systems. I'll give an example of the USDA organic. All of those farms have to be audited by a third party. They have to have all their records in shape so that they can be shown to be following the rules. The organic certifying program that my farm is part of, the Certified Naturally Grown organization, we are not quite third party verified, but each farm inspects another farm, so we're peer reviewed. So that's also a way of helping to ensure safer local food. There's GAP certification, which is a nationwide thing that's good agricultural practices. FSMA, which is the Food Safety Modernization Act, which came into effect a year or two ago. Visiting farms, getting to know your farmers. Also keep in mind that just because you're certified doesn't mean you're safe. You also have to ask those questions and make sure you're not cutting corners in order to get the food on the truck and stuff like that. Okay. Why is food safety important? Human death and illness related to foodborne disease, negative exposure, reputation, loss of customers, either through illness or death, lawsuits and litigation. So that's all important and related. So now, farmers and farming in Michigan. I gave you a whole bunch of statistics about the condition of farming back in January. And the bottom line is between 2007 and 2012, Michigan lost 10% of our farms and 2% of our farmland. And the situation that was in place then has in no way abated. In fact, it's probably even worse now. So if you're thinking about how can we have not only a safe local food system, but also a resilient one, a resilient food system that can buffer shocks like the current pandemic we're in, which is causing shelves in grocery stores to be bare because the food system can't keep up with the demand. We're reliant on food coming from a long distance away. We have to have local farmers. We have to have that local source of our food. In the study that I talked about during this class, where they looked at the state of Michigan farming, they asked the question, what would happen if Michiganders ate the amounts of fruits and vegetables that are recommended by the USDA, and a lot of that food came from the local economy? What would happen then? Well, we'd have better health outcomes because we're all eating more fruits and vegetables. We'd have greater farm income. Maybe we'd even reach the point where most of our farmers were actually making a profit. Wouldn't that be nice? Reduced loss of farmers and farms. In fact, we'd have to have an enormous increase in the number of farmers and farms in order to produce the amount of fruits and vegetables that are recommended. There'd be more demand for local foods, more need for farmers, and those local purchases would be kept not only within the economy, but each farmer would get a greater percentage of that income from the local produce. So it would help everything all around. So we talked quite a bit along the semester about the idea between value chains and supply chains. if we're thinking about the current food system, it's more or less a supply chain. Everyone is in it just to take money away and take it for themselves. They're not necessarily in it to provide us with healthy food, to ensure that each person or organization along that supply chain actually gets something good out of it. The supply chain tends to encourage monopolies because that's the most efficient way for a business to run in that mindset. It tends to be very secret. We don't want people to know that we're a monopoly, that we are predatory, competitive, and things like that. The flip side of that is what's called a value chain. And the whole idea about value chain is each spoke in the wheel of that chain adds value to the system, builds value at every step, and also receives value from that, such that if you have a value chain in our local food system, that farmer at the end of the chain is actually making a living wage and is helping both the economy and the environment and things like that. Overall, a value chain is a collaborative approach. Everybody has to work together for it to work. It rebalances power, so it's not like a pyramid where the top of that pyramid holds all the power and all the control and most of the money over everyone beneath it. It's a much more a win-win situation. So here's an example question. Which of the following ideas describes a value chain? A, encourages monopolies. B, primarily focused on profit. C, builds value in every step of the process. Or D, is very secretive about business details. Here the obvious answer is a value chain in which every component of the chain is adding value. The answer is C, builds value in every step of the process. Okay, I want to add here that some of these questions are similar or maybe similar to the ones I have in the exam, but they're not going to be exactly the same, I think. Anyway, so we talked about triple bottom line principles, and the idea behind triple bottom line principles basically puts the dichotomy between a value chain and a supply chain into something that's concrete, something that you can get a better idea of what it actually means. So when you're trying to run a business based on triple bottom line principles, you're creating a value chain. You're running the business in a way that focuses on more than just profit. If you remember on the virtual presentation I did on large scale food processing, that whole system, and how can an organization that's that large, how can they be sustainable? And that was the idea of B Corporation or benefit corporation. There are things that they can do, even if they're limited as to how much they can purchase from the local food system. There are other ways they can run their business that is going to be much more beneficial to everyone and they'll be able to follow bottom line principles. So triple bottom line has this 3 interlocking circles. The first one is social equity, and that's the first P. The easiest way to remember this idea is the 3 P's. So we've got social equity or people. How can you run a business in a way that supports all the people involved, whether they're suppliers or employees or customers, everyone in between. So you can pay living wages, you can make sure you give health insurance, paid time off, sick leave. And I know a lot of you are going through this as well, since you work so much in the in the restaurant industry. Not many organizations in the restaurant industry offer a lot of these things, and that's really unfortunate in the current situation. Do they offer good working conditions? Is the working environment welcoming? Does the organization have play an active role in the economy? I mean, in the community? I mean, do they take part in local events? Do they sponsor Little League teams? Whatever. All those things are ways that they can promote social equity. Another one there is purchasing some of their international ingredients from fair trade organizations. Okay, profit. Yes, an organization has to be economically viable in order to stay in business. So that's that aspect of the profit principle is important. Can they buy from local farms? Can they interact and spend their money on local businesses? Do they contribute to local charities and things like that? Are all ways that they can contribute to that profit or economic prosperity part of triple bottom line principles. Environmental stewardship. That the third P is planet. It's the only one we've got, so we have to take care of it. So what are some ways that an organization can contribute to environmental sustainability, environmental stewardship? Think about what you learned on the virtual Bells field trip and the types of things that they do. They do a lot of recycling. They do a lot of composting. They have an on-site waste treatment plant for all the water they use. They have intricate systems within the processing plant where they minimize the use of water and recycle as much of it as they can. So those are all things that can be done. If you remember at when we visited the Valley Dining Center on Western's campus, some of the ways that the building itself and the furnishings within it also minimize the carbon footprint of the building. The way that the light is filtered so that the sunlight, which they had tremendous amounts of, didn't heat up the building, and which would put extra stress on the air conditioning system, things like that. And so there are a lot of ways that corporations and small businesses and everything in between can follow triple bottom line principles. So here's an example question. A business which embodies triple bottom line principles may A, pay employees living wages, B, prioritize local purchasing, C, work to reduce energy use, D, all of the above. Obviously, the answer is D. Okay, we talked about nutrition and product quality back in January. This is the class where we had lab 1, where we were looking at the Brix and acidity of apples. So many conditions and practices will affect the nutrition available in foods. How does the stage of maturation of a fruit or vegetable when it's picked affect nutrition? A lot of the fruits and vegetables that we get in the grocery store that are part of that incredibly long supply chain back to wherever in the world they're grown, a lot of those things will affect the nutrition, and a lot of those fruits and vegetables are picked when they're underripe. Now, when a plant is reaching nutrition, that's going to be when it's at its peak of nutrients, at least as far as what we as human beings and as animals that eat that fruit and vegetable get out of it. So the more mature a fruit or vegetable is, the more nutritious it's going to be. So those tomatoes that you buy in the store in January or wherever they're out of season here are picked green, and they're artificially ripened, and then they're brought to you and they look like they've just come off the vine, but it's been quite a while. So the more local it is, the more likely it's going to be picked at the peak of ripeness. How does plant variety In other words, whether it's an heirloom or a hybrid, an old variety, a wild variety, etc. How does that affect the nutrition? They've studied this a lot, and it's been shown that the closer the variety is to its wild ancestor, the more nutrition is going to be in the fruit or vegetable. So if you're looking at, for example, sweet corn, if you have a variety that was grown 150 years ago compared to some of the super sweet varieties you can get now, the super sweet varieties may taste great. The breeders have exchanged some of the nutrition in the corn for more sugar. So the older a plant variety is, the better it's going to be as far as nutrition. Growing practices. So how do growing practices impact nutrition? Think back to when we had the farmers in. The more the farmer works to increase the health of the soil, you've got the best chance of getting highly nutritious food. Think of it like your body's immune system. The more healthy food you eat, the more the sleep you get, the less stress you get, your whole system is going to be in better health, and you're going to have better health outcomes. So the other things we looked at were Brix and acidity. But we talked about it both in the class, so review those slides on it, and also from our Apple lab. So what is Brix? Brix measures, on a technical perspective, it measures sugars, acids, and amino acids. But the way it's used, it's primarily used as a quick and dirty method, not quite dirty, but a quick method to measure the amount of sugars in the product. How can it be used? You can use it whether you're in a farm field trying to figure out whether a crop is ripe enough to be harvested in a processing situation. Let's say you're making jam. Unlike homemade jam, which has a set amount of pectin and it makes an assumption about how sweet the fruit is, if you're making a large quantity of jam, you need to know how much sugar is in the fruit so that you know how much sugar to add and how much pectin to add for the product to work. Does it measure the fat content? Well, if you remember above, it measures sugar, acids, and amino acids. Amino acids being one of the building blocks of proteins, so no, it does not measure fat content. If you're trying to figure out how long to semi-dehydrate tomatoes, for example, if you know what the starting Brix is, that will give you a good idea how long it's going to take to get your dried tomatoes. So that's a possible question you might see something similar on the test. Apples. What kinds of factors influence the Brix in apples? The variety. We tested, oh my gosh, how many different varieties we tested. We probably had about 8 different varieties, and they had quite a range of sweetness, and that you could taste that sweetness. The maturity. If you tasted an unripe apple, it would be pretty tart. It wouldn't have developed the sweetness that it's going to when it's mature. So maturity definitely influences it. Water. How much water can be, so was there a plentiful rainfall during the season so that the apple was able to develop normally? Fertility. Again, if the soil is healthy, you're going to get the optimum conditions to produce the best fruit. So the fertility of the soil is important. Why is knowing the Brix of apples or tomatoes or anything else important? We talked about that a little on the last slide. Estimates of sugar content can influence consumer acceptability. Say you've got a new variety of apples and you don't quite know what conditions are going to be best for the best type of fruit. So having the ability to measure the Brix can give you an easy and inexpensive and objective measurement to figure out whether you got the conditions right. Okay. We also measured the acidity of the apples. For that, we needed a pH meter. Remember that with pH, a high pH is going to be like 14, and that means it has low acidity, or it's more alkaline than acid. High acid means it's got a low pH. So those are just technical details about pH. Now, an apple is going to be more acidic than other things, and there was some difference in acidity with the apples. And one thing we found is that some of the apples, you might have had 2 apples that had a similar Brix measurement, but they had different acidity, which changed how our mouth would perceive the level of sweetness. So that's an important detail about why we need to know something about pH. You remember back to lab 4. Lab 4 was when we did some canning in lab, and we used a steam canner, which is essentially technically the same, has the same effect on the food as a water bath canner. The biggest reason that pH is important is because it determines what kind of canning process has to be done to ensure the food is safe. And the reason is because we're looking at the bacteria Clostridium botulinum, which is a tricky little creature. It has a spore which can survive boiling temperatures, but it doesn't survive, even the spore doesn't survive if the pH is below 4.6. So if you've got a process, say you're making pickles, which means you're adding vinegar, and you have a pH less than 4.6, you'll be able to use a water bath canner. Excuse me. So yeah, that's why pH was important. If you have a fruit or if you have a acid, you can use water bath canning, and you don't have to worry about Clostridium botulinum. Okay, I'm back. Just had a sneeze, and my partner was in getting matches and a telephone call. So back to class. Okay, on January 30th, we talked about food business incubators, local food businesses, and we had a field trip to the Can-Do Kitchen. So to remind you, we talked about food business incubators. Now, what is a food business incubator, and why is it an important part of the local food system? Food business incubators, when it comes to an incubator, you've got to remember that word incubator is there for a reason. If you've got a baby that's born prematurely and it's in an incubator, the incubator is a system or a machine that helps that immature human being survive. So a food business incubator is an organization or a system that helps that young food business survive, gives them some of the tools and some of the information and some of the help that they need to survive. Incubators can be for-profit or nonprofit. But essentially they help startup businesses get off the ground. What kinds of services can they provide? Some incubators only provide commercial kitchen space. When you look at the costs to actually build up a new commercial kitchen, that can be $250,000, $300,000 to $500,000. Those types of sums are often way beyond what a just starting business can afford. They offer business development help. Okay, let's get your business plan in place. Let's figure out how much money you're going to need to get it off the ground. What kinds of ingredients are going to you use? Do you need some connections between you and local farmers in order to get good deals on your ingredients? They help with labeling, all the regulations and rules that are required to ensure that your labels follow all the rules. You're going to need some licenses, food business licenses. The steps that you have to take to get your licenses in place can be daunting. And if you've got a mentor to help you through that, that's invaluable help. Business planning, funding, and more. So a food business incubator does all that. And the way that Can Do Kitchen does it is they have their Can Do Camp, which is like a 16-week program where each class session is a different topic, and you learn a lot about all of these things. And the Can Do Kitchen considers that even if you go through Can Do Camp and you decide, well, maybe that's not for me, they've saved you lots of money and they've saved you time. And if you work with the Can Do Kitchen, produce your product, and get to the end of their 3-year period, and then decide that, nope, I don't want to produce a food product, I want to go back to being a chef in a restaurant, they don't consider that a failure. The fewer businesses that either make it to success or decide not to stay in business without costing those business people tons of money, they consider that a success. Why are they important in a local regional food system? They create a limited risk way to get into a small scale food business. And if you think about some of the hurdles, some of the barriers to creating a really strong and healthy and integrated local food system, an incubator is one of those organizations that fills one of those gaps. Local meat. We had one of our field trips to Pease Packing where we got to see a much smaller scale version of some of the enormous packing houses, meat processing plants, which, if you've been listening to the local news, have also been in great difficulty. And some of the reasons you might want to choose local meat over the conventional food systems meat are you can help get more of the food dollar back to the farmers. You can choose farmers who treat animals better, whether it's grass-based or farmers that try to keep local to minimize the stress of transporting animals long distances. And what are some other reasons that it's difficult to find local meat? Throughout the last century, there's been so much consolidation in the food industry that there are fewer and fewer meat processors around, to the point where it's often difficult in some areas of the country for people who actually raise thousands of cattle to eat their own meat because they have to send them to processing plants far away. There are also more feedlots, and that's an environmental issue. Feedlots produce tremendous amounts of manure, which is hard to get rid of. They have to bring in truckloads and truckloads grain to feed the animals, because if you're having them concentrated in such a small area, there's no way you can eat grass. And so there's a lot of environmental issues with large animal production. So that's something to remember as you're going through your review. So what is the economic multiplier effect? The economic multiplier is where, by doing things locally and spending your money locally, you can also have a much greater impact on the local food system. Each time you spend $1 locally, the person who received that dollar can spend it locally. And so you're increasing the amount of economic activity based on those local purchases. So there are several different definitions that you need to know. They are direct effects, indirect effect, induced effects, and leakage. Hopefully, the direct effect and leakage are pretty straightforward. When it's leakage, think about a tin can with lots of holes in it. That's the economic food system. Leakage, you pour $100 worth of liquid into that can, and because you have holes in it, a lot of it leaks out. That leaking is all the money that leaves the local community and benefits somebody else's pocket, but not the local community. The direct effect is that initial local purchase. Remember back in class, we played that game with Monopoly money. The person, the chef who bought $100 worth of produce from the local farmer at the farmer's market, that's the direct effect, the direct initial purchase. Now, the indirect effects are all the purchases that stay local that came about because of that first purchase. So it's like a bouncing ball. Throwing the ball down onto the ground is the direct effect. And each time that ball comes up and bounces down and bounces and bounces, those are all the indirect effects. Now, induced effects are each one of those business people that had purchases made from them along the way have employees. Those employees are paid as a result of that direct purchase, that initial purchase, and they also can buy things locally. So the multiplier effect is the sum total of all the money that's spent locally. It's the sum of the direct effect, all of the indirect subsequent purchases, plus any local purchases made by employees. So all of those three are local purchases. The leakage is over here, and that's the stuff that goes away. Okay? So you'll remember this chart. I've divided it up into only two categories, local and leakage. The local include the direct effect, that initial purchase, the indirect effect, or all those subsequent purchases, and then induced, which is the last column, veg farm employee. The blue part is the local purchases that employee made. So if we add up all of the blue, we've got all of the local impact from that purchase. So we added up, initial purchase was 100. The vegetable farmer bought composted manure, $25 out of that. The sheep farmer had local purchases. The grain farmer had local purchases, and the chicken farmer had local purchases, and the employee had local purchases. All came up to $210, being the total economic multiplication effect. So the local impact was 210, and there was only $55 that went out of the economy as leakage. There are several questions about this on the test, so study it. Especially know the difference between which parts of this chart are local and which are leakage, okay? Food hub. What's a food hub? We talked about that back in February. A food hub is a business or organization that aggregates food from a lot of local to mid-sized farms, distributes it to either individuals or institutions. It markets the food as source identified food. If you remember back to when we went to the grocery stores, and both the co-op and Midtown Fresh had local products, but only the co-op really promoted them. So if you're not promoting them, you're not doing two things. You're not educating the consumer about why buy local food. It's healthier, it helps the economy more, blah, 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 all that stuff. If you just have it there for them to purchase, then you're thinking along the lines of a supply chain. I just want to get the food from the producer to the consumer and make money in the middle. I don't want to add value. So a food hub is one of those organizations that adds value, and it actively gets food from small and medium-sized farms, which have less access to some customers, to institutions. That's what our food hub does anyway. So there's a couple different kinds of food hubs: farms to business, farms to consumer, and farms that do a bit of both. And the reason that there's a difference in those few types of food hubs is going to depend a lot on local circumstances. Over the last 20 years or so, we've had a lot more farmers markets open. And so the farm to consumer food hub, at least in our area, is not as important as the farm to business. Okay. How can a food hub support and improve a local regional food system? Well, the Valley Hub has been able to work with many farms to increase the volumes of produce available to institutions. They minimally process produce, which reduces the burdens on institutions. They simplify the transition to local foods for institutions with limited space or equipment to process produce directly from farms. Over the last 30, 40, 50 years, a lot of institutions, whether it's hospitals or stores, schools, retirement homes, anything like that, they've gradually gotten rid of a lot of their equipment in their kitchens, so they can't easily use local food. Inspects and ensures that farms comply with safety requirements. If you've got an institution and they want to increase the amount of local food that they have, and their only option is to individually check out all these farms, they're not going to be able to do it. So that's where a food hub comes in. This is as we got into lab 3 and lab 4, we looked at what some of the things that food hub has to consider when they're trying to develop new products. And so go over this if you can. Getting local food into institutions. That's when we had the speakers from Bronson and visited the Valley Dining Center. What are some reasons you'd want to increase the local food? I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but anyway, I think I've sounded like that all semester. Increase access to nutritious food. Support all those family farms that we need to have that resilient local food system. Develop all those food and ag-related businesses that can create jobs, circulate capital, increase that local impact, economic impact, improve working conditions and living conditions for farm laborers, and also work on things from an aspect of policies. And that's where we came to the Michigan Good Food Charter. and we learned how Bronson has far surpassed this, but that a lot of institutions are still trying to get to that point. What are some barriers to using local foods? These are some things that a lot of the institutions experience. As I said before, a lot of them have gotten rid of kitchen equipment that makes it possible to handle food coming directly from farms. They fear that purchasing locally will increase costs. That's one thing that Bronson found, that no, if you do it right, if you do it well, it doesn't increase cost. Lack of experience preparing direct from farm food. The cooks that they hire don't have that experience, so that's something that has to be relearned. Quantities produced by local farms are too small for institutional needs. That last one is especially where food hubs come in. Calculations. Okay, there is a yield question on the exam. Here we have incoming product weight of 100 and ending product weight weighed 77 pounds. What is the yield? So it's finished product, it didn't line up quite. So finished product weight divided by starting product weight gives 77 over 100, or 0.77, which is 77%. So that's how you calculate yield. And that we did in both labs 3 and labs 4. So you should have that information. Calculation of processing costs for Food Hub products. I'll let you read through that. It was the processing cost per pound of a product has 2 components, ingredient cost and labor cost. The ingredient comes where you have the ingredient cost divided by yield times 100 pounds gives you $129.87. Oh, this is 100 pounds. So labor cost is 2 people, 2 hours, $10 is $40. So it costs $169.87 to process 100 pounds. Divide that by 100 and you get $1.70 per pound of potatoes. That's to get it from the incoming dirty, fresh from the farm potatoes to where the end product is. For in this case, it's for a Food Hub product. So it's your cut, peeled, and packaged, or cut and peeled potatoes. So in this question, there's also, what is the part of the whole cost that was the greatest? Well, the product cost in this was $129.87, and the labor cost was $40. So in this case, the product cost was the most expensive. So if you're charged with figuring out how to reduce the processing cost for potatoes, because the $1.70 per pound doesn't compare very well with other products that the hospital can purchase, how can you reduce that cost? Look for lower priced potatoes. Increase your yield so that you're not losing quite so much. Work with farmers to guarantee a lower cost for the potatoes. So if you can guarantee that you're going to buy so many pounds of potatoes, the farmer has that basically as ensuring he's got that income coming in. So he's maybe likely to accept a lower cost per pound. Change the process to reduce labor, increase training, incorporate more automation. So there's all kinds of ways that you could look at that system and figure out ways to cut the cost. Now you don't want to cut it so much that you're reducing the pay to your employees, or you're increasing the environmental impact and things like that. So you want to keep your triple bottom line ideas in mind. Okay, retail store. That was on February 6th. How can a retail store follow triple bottom line principles? Remember the 3 P's in this: planet, people, and profit. So buying locally, which the food co-op did, and also promote the fact that they are local. Give people a reason to understand why local is better. Focus on healthy foods and sustainably raised and processed foods. The co-op is located in a food desert, so it's accessible by public transport, and it's also located somewhere where not everyone has access to local food before. Hire locally, offer education, do all the planet-related things: compost, recycle, reduce energy use, renewable energy, etc. Price differences, it has to be affordable to people, but in this case, if they know they're getting higher quality food and it's potentially possibly more nutritious, then they may be more likely to spend a little more if the benefits outweigh the downsides. We focused a lot on local in the class. So how does a local food contribute to a more sustainable, resilient, and vibrant local food system? So that's another way. Why did we focus on it? Because it can increase the amount of the food dollar getting back to the farmer. You can reduce the food miles, which could potentially reduce the carbon footprint of the food. Increases the source of food, both local and food from farther away are consumed. But we're not, by focusing some of our dollars on local, we aren't totally dependent on far away sources of food and long supply lines. I guess I didn't edit that very well. Local food also has the potential to be fresher, have more nutrients, be picked at peak of ripeness, and better for consumers. So think about some other reasons why local, and focusing a little bit more on local food has a benefit. Virtual presentation for marketing. There are steps to a marketing campaign. There are reasons why you want to make your local food stand out against food from the conventional food system. And for that, you need a plan. And these are some of the plans that, you might, some of the steps to the campaign. Gosh darn it, stop it. You want to have a goal. Are you just educating the consumers, or do you want to get them to come to your local food dinner? Who's your audience? Is it young people who go out a lot? Is it people who already know about local food? You want to introduce the idea of local food to a new audience, things like that. What's your campaign creative? Remember the pictures of those little Lego blocks there, that their shadows showed something totally different. You want something that's going to make people remember what you're trying to sell. What's your implementation strategy? How are you going to launch it? Then you're going to analyze your results, and then you're going to repeat it all. So pay attention to what these steps are, and what each of the steps actually means. Restaurants. Can restaurants follow triple bottom line principles and increase sustainability? Yes, they can. We saw that a bit in Western's dining facility. There are a lot of restaurants who've put ideas online about how to be more sustainable. There are barriers to it, and they're pretty much the same barriers as institutions, retail stores, and other organizations have. Partly, chefs might be unfamiliar with using food directly from farms, more familiar with something that's come already partially processed or in institutional packs. They might not have quite the tools. They believe it's more expensive. Lack of time to deal with many suppliers. It's often a hurdle when you have to try to juggle what's available to when, which farmer has what, and things like that. So there's a lot of barriers, but I think, and the people who run restaurants also think, that the benefits outweigh the barriers. Okay, we had local food or large-scale food manufacturers and how they can be more sustainable. That a lot of that came from the ideas from Bell's virtual tour, the types of things that Bell's is doing to be more sustainable, whether it's supporting events in the community to a green roof and their on-site water treatment plant, all the things that they have as an integral part of their process to reduce water use, reduce electricity use, and things like that. And also how they treat people. They, you get a certain amount of beer as part of your pay. You there's bike racks at Bell's Brew Pub. There's a gym at the Bell's processing facility. All those kinds of things. This idea also includes the idea of certified B or benefit corporations, which if you're looking to see what kinds of industry, what kinds of companies are certified, food companies are certified B Corporation, look that up online. It's quite interesting to see. Okay, final step is waste. If you remember from the food system map that we looked at earlier in the semester, waste just connects all of the different parts of the food system. So there has to be a good way to handle all the wastes that the food processing system as a whole creates. Right now, we send a lot of our waste to the landfill. And if you change this food recovery hierarchy to change the side, flip it over so that the bottom part is the biggest. Right now, the most food waste goes to landfills and incineration, and probably going up the pyramid would have the least amount being source reduction. But these are all, the EPA developed this food recovery hierarchy, with the most preferred being the top of the inverted pyramid, and that's source reduction. If we're reducing the volume of surplus generated, then we're going to be reducing the waste. Next is feed hungry people. Feed it to people first. Feed animals. Donate or divert food scraps to animal feed. That's one that Western's Dining Center did. Industrial uses. Waste oils for rendering, fuel conversion, all kinds of things that those food wastes can be used for that get an extra use out of them so that a smaller quantity ends up going to the landfill. Composting. I kind of almost change around composting and industrial uses, but we'll stick with this for now. And then landfill and incineration should be the last resort. Restaurants can do this. Large food processors can do it. Even people in their homes can do it. What are some barriers? Safety. Logistics is always a problem. It's so much easier to just send it to the landfill. We know that Good Samaritan laws make it absolutely legal for edible food to be donated to organizations that feed hungry people. That's law. So there should be that should not be a barrier. Basically, know this chart, know the steps in the recovery hierarchy, know which ones are more preferred and which ones are less preferred. Okay, that's it for the review. Basically, you can go over all the slides that we've done that are available on Moodle up till now, and all of your homework, and you'll have all the answers for the exam. It's going to be available from 4 p.m. today or whenever I get this in an email to you. Sometimes it takes a lot longer to render. Until 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, April 23rd. Also remember that any of your outstanding assignments, you need to get them to me in however you can. Take a picture and email it to me. It doesn't matter as long as I get it. I need that by the end of the day on Thursday as well. Thank you so much for being my students. It's been quite a whirlwind of a semester. Good luck in the future. And if you're around Kalamazoo on Saturdays this summer and the farmers market eventually reopens, stop and say hi. I'll be at the farmers market every Saturday. Okay, thanks a lot.